welcome to this explainer. You know, we usually think of a lack of established infrastructure as a severe limitation, right? But today, we're exploring a truly fascinating scenario: how Africa can skip the Industrial Revolution's mistakes entirely. We're looking at data suggesting this blank slate might actually be the continent's greatest strategic advantage.
So, let's dive into this provocative idea. What if starting from scratch actually frees you from the costly, deeply ingrained mistakes of the past? Think about it. When an entire region isn't weighed down by centuries of outdated infrastructure, decaying power grids, heavy reliance on coal, or massive rigid industrial complexes, you literally don't have to spend trillions fixing or upgrading old systems. You can just skip straight to the cutting edge.
To understand how this works, we're going to unpack this concept through 6 key areas: what leapfrogging is, the mobile and digital leap, skipping the fossil fuel trap, the green industrial revolution, projecting the 2050 impact, and finally, making this leap a reality.
Let's jump right into Section 1. What is leapfrogging?
So, what does this actually mean? Basically, rather than following the slow, historical pathway that industrialized nations took over the last century, latecomers can adopt the absolute newest technologies immediately. It's kind of like going straight from riding a horse to driving an electric car, completely skipping the steam engine and gas-guzzling eras in between. It fundamentally changes the timeline of economic development. Here's the thing. Established economies suffer from something called carbon lock-in. They have billions of dollars tied up in old, centralized fossil fuel grids. This creates a stubborn path dependency where it's cheaper in the short term to just maintain the polluting status quo. Africa, however, has the incredible flexibility to build differently right from the start. We're talking light, decentralized renewables and mobile networks, entirely sidestepping those historical traps.
Moving on to Section 2, let's look at a real-world example that's already happened: the mobile and digital leap. In the early 2000s, landline access across Africa was incredibly low. But instead of spending decades and billions of dollars laying down copper wire to connect remote villages and bustling cities, the continent just jumped straight to mobile networks. They completely skipped the physical constraints of 20th century communication infrastructure. To put the sheer scale of that technological jump into perspective, consider this number: 1 billion. Sub-Saharan Africa now leads the world with over 1 billion mobile money accounts. By leaping over the physical wire, they also leaped right past the traditional brick-and-mortar banking system. People went directly to mobile payments, which rapidly transformed access to financial services for millions of people. It was a real game changer.
Now, Section 3. Let's see how this applies to skipping the fossil fuel trap and creating a blank slate for energy.
The stakes here are absolutely crucial. In 2022, about 600 million people in Africa were still without power. Now, while that obviously poses a massive developmental challenge, it simultaneously presents an unprecedented blank slate. You can build a power grid from scratch without relying on the dirty, polluting methods the rest of the world used.
Instead of building outdated fossil fuel plants that are going to be economically locked in well past 2050, Africa can bypass that trap entirely. Extending traditional centralized grids to rural areas is painstakingly slow and prohibitively expensive. But decentralized solar mini-grids, they can cost as little as 20 cents per kilowatt hour. That delivers power quickly and cleanly, without any of that carbon lock-in.
This brings us to Section 4, the Green Industrial Revolution, and how it's powering a whole new economy.
We are already seeing serious continental momentum for this shift. African institutions have laid out frameworks like the Africa Green Industrialization Initiative, and at recent climate summits, leaders and financial institutions pledged over $100 billion to drive green infrastructure. So they aren't just treating green energy as environmental protection, they see it as the primary engine for massive economic growth.
Africa isn't just participating in the green revolution, it's practically equipped to lead it. Just look at these structural advantages. The continent holds 60% of the world's best solar resources, 60% of the remaining arable land, and 40% of the critical mineral reserves needed for green technologies. That sets the stage for a massive, undeniable competitive edge on the global stage.
But to truly leverage that advantage, there has to be a major shift away from the old model of just extracting raw materials and shipping them overseas. By keeping the processing and manufacturing local, doing things like building solar panels, assembling electric vehicles, refining critical minerals right there at home, these countries can create millions of jobs. They can build incredibly powerful cross-border green value chains rather than just exporting unrefined goods.
Okay, Section 5. Let's look at the numbers for projecting the 2050 impact and the potential economic gains.
When we project this out to 2050, the gap between the two trajectories is huge. If you compare the current path to a scenario that prioritizes digital leapfrogging and strategic large-scale infrastructure, the difference is striking. Following this accelerated leapfrogging scenario could increase GDP per capita by about $510 across the continent.
And those economic gains, they translate directly into human impact. If we follow that leapfrogging trajectory, the modeling projects we could see 63 million fewer people living in extreme poverty by 2050 compared to the current baseline path. We're talking about measurable, life-changing improvements in human development, completely avoiding the pollution of the past.
Ultimately, when you zoom out, combining these green technological leaps with improved basic infrastructure could expand the overall African economy by nearly $1 trillion. Yeah, a trillion with a T. That is the true scale of the leapfrogging opportunity when a whole continent bypasses the costly missteps of the 20th century.
Finally, Section 6, making the leap a reality. Because, well, it's not going to happen automatically.
Of course, this progress faces some severe structural bottlenecks. There's a massive shortfall in clean energy financing, which is largely due to high public debt and shallow capital markets. On top of that, there are significant gaps in technical skills and high-quality human resources. And notably, restrictive government policies, like internet shutdowns during elections, for example, actively stifle the exact digital innovation required for leapfrogging to actually work.
To overcome these bottlenecks and make this leap a reality, experts recommend a heavily coordinated, step-by-step approach. First up, governments must aggressively invest in local skills and capable institutions. Second, they need to coordinate trade across borders based on regional comparative advantages. And third, they have to implement justice-oriented policies. This ensures that the massive wealth generated from this new industrialization actually reaches all stakeholders equitably.
There's a really powerful insight from the sources that sums this all up. Leapfrogging isn't just about Africa catching up to the West. By entirely skipping the carbon lock-in of the 20th century and adopting green technologies, African countries can provide a brand new pathway of sustainable development for the rest of the world. It's about pioneering a totally new, cleaner industrial model.
So, as you reflect on the data we've covered today in this explainer, I want you to ask yourself, could the continent that is currently skipping the worst mistakes of the Industrial Revolution end up teaching the rest of the world exactly how to build the future?